Ladies and gentlemen, we will now be joined by Mr. Travis Frain, OBE, DL. Mr. Frain is the Director of Resilience and Unity and Chief of Secretariat for the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Terrorism and Security and a survivor of the 2017 Westminster Bridge terror attack.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, if we can still call it morning. Alex Davies, Salman Abedi, Jack Renshaw, Qasim Abukar, Zakaria El-Ogbani, Errol Insadal, Roshana Chowdhury, David Suwan, Damon Smith, and Michael Adebolajo. These are but 10 names from a long list that I have in front of me here, and I won't bore you with the full list, but I will implore each of you to reflect on what it is that connects each of these names in common. Now, when I was injured in the Westminster Bridge terrorist attack in March 2017, I wouldn't have been able to tell you the answer to that question. Visiting London for a few days with my friends, we were students at the time, just 19 years old, and none of us could have imagined the carnage that would ensue. Coming from a small town in rural England, terrorism doesn't affect us, or so we thought. But as that ISIS fanatic got in his car that day, mounted the pavement, and headed directly in our direction, our background, our naivety, our youth made no difference. In his eyes, we were legitimate targets all the same. It was a stark wake-up call, and one which began a slow-burning interest over the many months of time spent in and out of hospital that would follow. But as I began to recover, a more insidious threat became abundantly clear to me and to many of the other survivors of those attacks in 2017, and that was the willful and some might argue supportive environments that our university campuses were fostering and providing for extremists to spread their toxic narratives of hate and violence, often operating under the guise of championing human rights, advocating for disadvantaged groups, for example, and I'm sure we all know here, quite frankly, that these extremists could not care less about those groups that they purport to advocate for, or promoting new and exciting ideologies for students to engage with. Time and time again, these organizations with blatant extremist links tapped into the student body for a bank of young, impressionable recruits to their causes. So to go back to my question, what do all of those names that I mentioned at the start have in common? Well, it isn't their ideology, and it certainly isn't their socio-economic background. These are but 10 names, 10 individuals of an ever-growing group of people who have been radicalized on British campuses. Now, it may come as little surprise, therefore, that universities have historically proven to be home to some of the most intense anti-counterterrorism sentiment that we have in the UK. And indeed, each of those individuals that I mentioned was studying at universities well known to be active in their resistance against the PREVENT strategy, the UK's pre-crime de-radicalization program that helps those under the influence of radicalization before they can grow too hardline in their views to return from the brink. And even when not directly radicalizing individuals, extremist groups have repeatedly sought to exploit academia as a means to shift the debate in counterterrorism. And it is largely impossible now to hear any mention of PREVENT in the UK without commentators adding the prefix of Britain's controversial counterterrorism program, usually attached to it and usually with rather little merit. Now the reality is, as we can see with the programming of this conference, the voices of those with lived experience can possess an incredibly powerful opportunity to cut through the noise. And for, let's say, an infiltrationist, like someone, we'll say, from the Muslim Brotherhood, who is seeking to undermine PREVENT and other initiatives to safeguard people against extremism, their efforts to devalue this work are made far harder when faced with the brutal realities of someone who has experienced terrorism firsthand. And that's why at Resilience and Unity, the organization that I now work with, we focus on amplifying the voices of those with lived experience of extremism, whether those are survivors or indeed those who are once at risk of being drawn into committing an act of terror. And we place those testimonies in front of those who need to hear them most, acting as the, for lack of a better phrase, the battering ram that caves in the walls of complacency naivety, and indifference. But we cannot expect those individuals to speak up and share their story without providing them with the support they desperately need to make a full recovery, as full as possible from their experiences. As John O'Neill mentioned earlier today, from physical therapy to compensation, psychological treatment, through to recognition and remembrance, more can and more should be done. Not just for the victims, but for society as a whole. For if we can demonstrate that we are resilient and stand firm in the face of terrorism, supporting those affected to the best of our ability, then we ultimately invest dividends in our long-term cohesion and security. So, bringing this to a close, I want to thank, yet again, Ali and the rest of the guys at the Soufan Center here for their continued leadership on these issues and providing me with a platform to share with you all a little bit about the work that we do. I look forward to connecting with many of you over the coming days, and I am appreciative of the opportunity to speak with you all. Thank you.